Please take a second to subscribe, then like and share afterwards. We can really use your support. Thank you. Look now at the behemoth, which I made along with you. He eats grass like an ox. He moves his tail like a cedar. His bones are like beams of bronze. Sling stones are like stubble to him. Job 40:15-18. In this episode, we're going to take a sharp detour into a subject we've been waiting long to address. We failed to bring it to you in the Evidence Uncovered series when we should have, and there was no opportunity for it in the Prophecies Uncovered series. So we're taking this opportunity to address it right here and right now, because what you're about to discover about what we've been told about prehistoric times wasn't so far back as we were made to believe. To lay it all out for you, let's return to the rich descriptions we are given in the Old Testament. The book of Job describes the behemoth as a massive beast with features that were extremely large. The tail of a cedar suggests a beast just like that of a brontosaurus. The cedar tree in ancient biblical times was the largest and mightiest tree found in the forests of the Lebanon. He laughs at the threat of javelins. Darts are regarded as straw. He makes the sea look like a pot of ointment. On earth there is nothing like him. The Bible is clear that these beasts were created at the same time that man was made on the sixth day of creation, roughly 6,000 years ago. But how can that be? We're told that the dinosaurs lived roughly 60 million years ago. Well, it's time to throw out the entire deep time theory out the window. People argue that dinosaurs were never mentioned until their discovery just 2 centuries ago. Well, of course not. The term dinosaur wasn't even invented until the mid-1800s, so why would they be looking for it in written records? That is why we're looking for other words or descriptions in the past, and we found them. Prior to the global flood, people lived up to 900 years. The extremely different environmental conditions of the time allowed for life to span this long. We'll get more into these conditions later on. Keeping this in mind, it is a fact that reptiles never stop growing. We don't see them grow too large today, only because of their shorter lifespans. But before and shortly after the flood, if a reptile could live a few centuries, one can only imagine how large it can grow up to. And what does our fossil record reveal? Well, very big dinosaurs. We will also argue that certain dinosaurs survived the flood because they were taken onto the ark to survive with the rest. Of course, fully grown leviathans weren't taken, but rather young pairs that would be small and vibrant enough to reproduce aplenty later on. Now, why would we argue they were saved on the ark? Well, for one, if Job is speaking of the behemoth, then it was alive during his lifetime. And if we look back a few chapters, we can see that Job was living after the flood. Job 22:15-16. Will you keep the old way which wicked men have trod, who were cut down before their time, whose foundations were swept away by a flood? This tells us that dinosaurs had to be alive after the flood, and that is just what we see in accounts that we are about to lay out. Folklore and legends across the world that describe the dragons right up to the last 200 years. Even the Bible mentions dragons 35 times, not even counting the Leviathan in the book of Job. The Vikings, East Asians, The Balkans, South Americans, and Africans all have their legends of dragons who were large and fierce, and many of their heroes slew them with great victory. The Epic of Gilgamesh mentions the hunting of a dragon. An ancient Chinese historian, Sima Qian, records in his famous Records of the Grand Historian, Yu the Great was king of the ancient Xia dynasty. He was famed for introducing methods of flood control. Many dragons were driven from the marshlands when he created new farmland. Babylonian pictographs and wall carvings depict dragons, the most famous along the walls of Ishtar Gate, now in Berlin, Germany. The same too with pictographs in Egypt, Thailand, Bulgaria, and Japan. While living in China, Marco Polo reported that the emperor raised dragons to pull chariots in parades. Why would Polo report such a fantastic story as if it weren't true? His writings were completely journalistic in nature. In 1611, the emperor of the Ming dynasty appointed the post of the royal dragon feeder. Books even tell of Chinese families raising dragons to use their blood for medicines and highly prizing their eggs. Legends go on and on. We need to remember that the first findings of dinosaur bones and attributing them to extinct overgrown carnivorous lizards only occurred in the early 1800s. So it leads us to ask how any of these legends could have known about them before these initial dinosaur discoveries. After discovering dinosaur carvings inside a cave at Grand Canyon, Doheny Scientific Expedition in Canyon, northern Arizona stated, "The fact that some prehistoric man made a pictograph of a dinosaur on the walls of this canyon upsets completely all of our theories regarding the antiquity of man. Given all the records to indicate that these overgrown behemoths were prized kills, it's no wonder they have gone extinct." Today, scientists are baffled by new discoveries that may prove once and for all that dinosaurs did not live over 60 million years ago. The first to make this discovery was Mary Schweitzer, a molecular paleontologist at North Carolina State University, accidentally discovered blood cells from a 68-million-year-old Tyrannosaurus rex. Being a fossil, there should have been nothing left. Schweitzer immediately wanted to conceal the findings because she knew her entire career would be at stake. But the findings came out anyway, causing some to argue that the specimen was either contaminated by outside samples, which wasn't the case due to repeated tests, or that iron from the blood somehow must have preserved the fragments. This claim was later refuted by scientists because it would have never come into contact with the core of the bone where these samples were taken from. Yet the science of tissue and protein decay demonstrates, proven in a lab, that the blood cells could not survive so long to begin with. On top of all that, iron is not standardized protocol for the preservation of tissues. In fact, there is nothing present that could ever preserve these for very long. Since this time, scientists and paleontologists have started looking elsewhere for soft tissue, and they are finding it. But the machine of suppression was turned on worldwide, and scientists everywhere are losing their jobs or having their funding cut off. In other words, soft tissue could not survive tens of thousands of years, let alone tens of millions. More accurately, as some scientists assert, they could not be much older than Egyptian mummies. Educational institutions will not allow for anything that may destabilize the current authority on what is taught in universities, so it is suppressed. At an American geophysical conference in Singapore, an international team of scientists presented their findings from 10 different dinosaurs from every continent, had tests done at the world's leading labs, revealing their levels of C14. Afterwards, the American Geophysical Union censored their papers and removed all reference to their findings in their official documents. It would be withheld from the general public. So we have soft tissues and bones, amino acids found in dinosaur eggshells, and what we are about to explore, carbon-14 that still exists in these specimens. Why does that matter? Well, here's how carbon-14 dating works. Our atmosphere contains roughly 78% nitrogen, 21% oxygen, 0.06% carbon dioxide, and 0.0000765% radioactive carbon, or C14, which combines with oxygen, which mixes equally with CO2 by wind currents. The extremely small amount of C14 is produced by radiation from the sun when striking the nitrogen in the atmosphere. Roughly only 21 pounds of C14 is produced every year across the entire planet. When viewing the periodic table, carbon and nitrogen are immediately next to each other. Nitrogen has an atomic weight of 14, while carbon's weight is 12. The nitrogen that was struck by the radiation becomes carbon-14 because its weight remains unchanged. It is now radioactive, meaning it is unstable and will eventually break apart. The science reveals that roughly half of this will break down into nitrogen every 5,730 years. But while it is C14, it normally latches onto oxygen and becomes carbon dioxide. As we all know, plant life take in this CO2. Animals then come along and eat some of this plants. This is the only way this carbon enters the animal. Some of this carbon is still radioactive. This leads scientists to agree that plants contain roughly 0.0000765% C14. Now, whenever this animal dies, it stops taking in carbon. Therefore, it will begin to decay along with the rest of the animal. So in carbon dating, they compare the amount of C14 in the fossil with the amount in the atmosphere, then conclude how many years that it must have been dead. Measurements are determined in the following. Beyond this 1/16th of a unit, it becomes too little to measure after 40 to 50,000 years. The Institute for Creation Research, who did the RATE project, came out with an article stating, with their short 5,700-year half-life, no carbon-14 atoms should exist in any carbon older than 250,000 years. Conventional carbon-14 laboratories have been aware of this anomaly since the early 1980s and have striven to eliminate it. Non-biased scientists have confirmed such observations for coal samples which cannot be contaminated in situ with recent carbon. These constitute very strong evidence that the Earth is only thousands, not billions of years old. If coal seams were formed 250 million years ago in the Carboniferous era, how can it still contain any C14? The same too with these dinosaur bones. How can these have measurable amounts of C14 if they are any older than 50,000 years? It is all a big lie. It is true, carbon dating is not a reliable method to measure dating. However, It is reliably sufficient to tell us the range of time in the thousands of years bracket, but surely not anywhere past this. Now, we look at one final piece of evidence. Atmospheric physicists have speculated that our atmosphere may have been much more dense in the past, which would have partially or completely blocked X-ray or UV radiation from entering our atmosphere. We know this to be true simply because multiple C14 dating on the same specimen have found drastically different readings. A woolly mammoth found in Alaska in the 70s had 2 readings done. The lower leg had the radiocarbon age of 15,380 years, while its skin and flesh were 21,300 years. How can 2 parts of the same animal be different ages separated by 6,000 years? If only one can be right, then how can we determine that either can be right at all? Let's try another. They've tested a living mollusk. Its shell was dated at being 2,300 years old. Yet the record for the world's oldest living mollusk belonged to an Icelandic clam at 507 years before it died. So these dating discrepancies happen all the time. To conclude, scientists from the Institute of Egyptology and Institute of Physics have stated at proceedings of the 12th Nobel Symposium in New York, 1970. If a C14 date supports our theories, we put it in the main text. If it does not entirely contradict them, we put it into a footnote, and if it is completely out of date, we just drop it. The Earth's age of billions of years was adopted for one reason: to reconcile the existence of all of today's fully developed life forms through the gradual evolutionary processes by way of natural selection. Deep time simply became necessary to understand Earth's formation to the present time. The geologic column is where it all started. The Earth was divided up into layers or eras: the Precambrian, Paleozoic, Mesozoic, Cenozoic, and others in between. Each of these were assigned the age in which they occurred, including the index fossil. Those who created this then had to prove that these layers were as old as they were assigned to be. The fossils found therein are really dated by their position in the geologic column, which does not even exist anywhere in the world other than in their textbooks. Anything that is found to show fossils that don't belong in its era are rejected because they don't fit the narrative. According to Derek Ager, who wrote The New Scientist, geologic position is all that is used to date fossils. They do not use radioactive decay. Why? Because they know it would disprove deep time. Here on Mysteries Uncovered.